The mirror in the hotel bathroom was unforgiving, its harsh fluorescent light casting shadows that seemed to highlight every curve Evelyn Thomas had learned to hide. She stood there in her underwear, holding the emerald green bikini she'd packed 3 months ago when this Bahamas vacation had seemed like a dream. Now it felt like a prison sentence. "Ev, you almost ready?" Marcus's voice drifted through the door, tinged with that particular brand of impatience she'd grown to recognize. "The resort shuttle leaves in 20 minutes. She pressed the bikini against her body, remembering the day she'd bought it. The saleswoman had been so encouraging, talking about how the color brought out Evelyn's hazel eyes, how the cut was flattering for her figure. At size 14, Evelyn had felt beautiful that day, confident, ready to surprise her husband of 8 years with something that wasn't her usual black one-piece with the little skirt attached. "Just a few more minutes," she called back, her voice smaller than she intended. The bikini tags were still attached. She'd been too nervous to try it on when they'd arrived yesterday, and now, staring at her reflection, she understood why her instincts had protected her. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the confident marketing executive who commanded boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals. This woman looked uncertain, vulnerable, ashamed. Marcus knocked on the door. "Seriously, Ev, what's taking so long?" She opened the door, still in her underwear, holding the bikini like a question. Marcus glanced up from his phone, his expression shifting in a way that made her stomach clench. His eyes traveled down her body, and she watched his face change, not with desire or appreciation, but with something that looked dangerously close to disappointment. "Is that what you're planning to wear?" His voice was carefully neutral, the same tone he used in his law practice when delivering bad news to clients. We're at a beach resort. I bought this specifically for this trip." She held up the bikini, the emerald fabric catching the light. Marcus set down his phone and ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. At 42, he still had the lean build of the college tennis player he'd once been, maintained through religious CrossFit sessions and a diet that seemed to consist mainly of protein shakes and grilled chicken. "Look, honey, I'm just saying, maybe the one piece would be more comfortable for you. The word comfortable landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of humiliation through her chest. "What do you mean, comfortable?" He moved closer, placing his hands on her shoulders in a gesture that might have seemed loving to an observer, but felt patronizing to her. "You've gained some weight since we got married, Ev. It's not a big deal, but maybe showing that much skin isn't the best idea. There are going to be a lot of people at the beach today." The world seemed to tilt slightly. 8 years of marriage, and she'd never heard him speak so directly about her body. Oh, there had been hints, the way he'd started turning away when she changed clothes, how he'd stopped initiating intimacy, the subtle suggestions about trying that new spin class or maybe cutting back on carbs. But this was different. This was him looking at her body and finding it lacking, shameful, something to be hidden. "Too fat," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I didn't say fat," Marcus protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "I just think you'd be more confident in something that's more forgiving." She looked down at her body, the soft curve of her belly, the fullness of her hips, the stretch marks from carrying her daughter Sarah 15 years ago. When had this body, which had brought life into the world, which carried her through 12-hour workdays, which had once made Marcus's breath catch when she walked into a room, become something shameful? "Right," she said quietly, wrapping a hotel robe around herself. But as Marcus returned to his phone, scrolling through emails with the same focused intensity he brought to everything else, Evelyn made a different choice. She pulled on shorts and a flowing cover-up, something that hid everything, while revealing nothing. The bikini went back into her suitcase, tag still attached, a small surrender that felt enormous.
The beach was exactly as the brochure had promised. Pristine white sand, crystal blue water, palm trees swaying in a breeze that carried the scent of coconut sunscreen and salt air. The resort, the Paradise Cove, was one of those places that existed solely to make people forget their real lives, at least temporarily. Couples lounged on cabanas, sipped tropical drinks with tiny umbrellas, and took selfies against the backdrop of infinity pools that seemed to blend seamlessly with the ocean. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Marcus had reserved them a premium spot, complete with a private cabana and dedicated server. He was already on his second mojito, his laptop balanced on his knees as he reviewed a brief for Monday's court appearance. Even in paradise, work came first. "This is beautiful," Evelyn said, settling into her lounge chair and pulling her cover up tighter. Around them, other couples seemed effortlessly beautiful, tanned, toned, comfortable in their skin in ways that seemed as foreign to her as speaking Mandarin. Marcus murmured without looking up. "Did you remember to call the insurance company about Sarah's car accident? The adjuster said, 'I handled it yesterday, before we left.'" She watched the water, where a group of women around her age were playing volleyball, their laughter carrying on the wind. They moved with unself-conscious joy, diving for the ball, celebrating points with high fives and mock victory dances. One of them, a redhead with generous curves and a confidence that seemed to radiate from her pores, caught Evelyn's eye and waved. "Come play," the woman called. "We need another player." Evelyn's heart jumped with something that felt like possibility. When was the last time she had played volleyball? High school, probably? But the invitation felt like an opening, a chance to be someone other than the woman who was too fat for a bikini. "Go ahead," Marcus said, without looking up. "I need to finish this brief anyway." But as Evelyn stood and began to remove her cover-up, Marcus's hand caught her wrist. "Maybe just watch for now. You don't want to overexert yourself in this heat." The concern in his voice sounded genuine, but underneath it was something else, something that whispered, "Don't embarrass us." She looked at the women in the water, then at her husband's carefully neutral expression, and sat back down. "You're right. It is pretty hot." The afternoon passed in a haze of half-read romance novels and increasingly elaborate frozen drinks. Marcus fielded work calls, occasionally reaching over to pat her hand absently, the gesture feeling more obligatory than affectionate. Other couples around them seemed to exist in their own bubbles of intimacy, feeding each other bites of fresh fruit, taking turns applying sunscreen, and stealing kisses between chapters of shared books. When had she and Marcus stopped being like that? The question nagged at her as she watched a young couple nearby, the woman laughing as her boyfriend tried to take an artistic photo of her against the sunset. The woman was probably a size 16, maybe 18. But she posed with the kind of confidence that had nothing to do with measurements and everything to do with being seen, really seen, by someone who found her beautiful. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed too beautiful to be real, Marcus finally closed his laptop. "Good day," he announced, stretching. "I got through most of the Morrison case. Tomorrow we can do that snorkeling excursion you wanted." Evelyn nodded, though she couldn't remember expressing particular enthusiasm for snorkeling. It was another activity that would require a swimsuit, another opportunity to feel exposed and found wanting. Religiously. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, had turned wavy from the humidity. She looked different somehow. Not better or worse necessarily, just different. The emerald bikini still lay in her suitcase, price tags a reminder of dreams deferred. She touched the fabric, remembering the woman who had bought it 3 months ago. That woman had believed she deserved beautiful things, had imagined herself walking confidently across hot sand, diving into crystal-clear water, feeling the sun on her skin without shame. Where had that woman gone? A knock on the bathroom door interrupted her thoughts. "Ev, dinner reservations are in 30 minutes. "Coming," she called, reaching for her black dress, the one that was appropriately loose, appropriately modest, appropriately invisible. But as she zipped it up, watching her reflection disappear beneath the forgiving fabric, Evelyn Thomas made herself a promise. This wouldn't be her story. The woman who bought that bikini was still in there somewhere, and before this vacation was over, she was going to find her. She just didn't know yet that finding herself would cost her everything she thought she wanted, and give her everything she never knew she needed. The resort's main dining room was the kind of place that existed in travel magazines, all warm wood and soft lighting, with tables positioned to catch glimpses of the ocean through floor-to-ceiling windows. Marcus had requested their usual table, tucked away in a corner where he could keep his back to the wall and his phone within easy reach. Even on vacation, he approached restaurants like a war room, always positioning himself for the best strategic advantage. Evelyn smoothed her black dress as they were seated, the fabric settling around her like familiar armor. Across the dining room, she noticed the redhead from the beach volleyball game sitting with a group of friends, still glowing from the sun, her laughter carrying across the space like music. The woman wore a flowing sundress in bright coral, the kind of color Evelyn had trained herself to avoid, and she looked radiant. "The sea bass looks good," Marcus said, studying the menu with the same intensity he brought to legal documents. "You should probably stick with the grilled chicken, though. You know how rich food affects your stomach." Did she? She couldn't remember the last time she'd ordered something indulgent, something that made her mouth water instead of something that met Marcus's approval. When had she stopped trusting her own preferences, her own body's desires? Their server, a young man with kind eyes and a genuine smile, approached. "Good evening. I'm Roberto, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with some drinks?" "Scotch neat," Marcus said without looking up. "The Macallan 18, if you have it." "Of course, sir. And for the lady." Evelyn hesitated. She wanted something tropical, something that tasted like vacation and possibility. "She'll have a white wine spritzer," Marcus interrupted smoothly. "The Sauvignon Blanc, light on the wine." Roberto's pen paused over his notepad, his eyes flicking to Evelyn with a question she couldn't answer. "Of course," he said carefully. "I'll give you a few more minutes with the menu." As Roberto walked away, Evelyn felt something crack inside her chest. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, like the first hairline fracture in a window before it shatters completely. "I was going to order a piña colada," she said quietly. Marcus looked up from his menu, eyebrows raised. "Those things are loaded with calories, Ev. Empty calories. You always complain about feeling bloated after we eat out." The thing is, she couldn't remember complaining about that. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been asked what she wanted, really wanted, about anything. When had her preferences become so invisible, even to herself? The meal proceeded with Marcus's usual efficiency, appetizers that were light but satisfying, entrees that were sensible choices, and dessert politely declined because we're both watching our waistlines. Evelyn ate her grilled chicken and steamed vegetables while watching other diners enjoy cream sauces and wine that came in actual glasses instead of spritzers that tasted like regret. After dinner, they walked along the resort's private beach. The sand was cool beneath their feet, and the sound of waves created a rhythm that seemed to invite conversation. But Marcus was already back on his phone, returning calls from colleagues who apparently couldn't survive 48 hours without his input. "Sarah texted," Evelyn said, scrolling through her own messages. "She got an A on her literature midterm." "Good," Marcus said absently, his attention focused on his screen. "That'll help with her GPA for college applications." Their daughter was 15, a sophomore in high school with her mother's hazel eyes and her father's analytical mind. But where Marcus saw college applications and strategic advantages, Evelyn saw young women who wrote poetry in the margins of her textbooks and volunteered at the animal shelter, not for her resume, but because she loved the dogs that nobody else wanted. She also said she's thinking about trying out for the drama club, Evelyn added.
Marcus frowned. Drama club? That's not going to look good on applications. She should focus on debate team or model UN, something that demonstrates leadership and critical thinking. Evelyn watched her husband as he spoke, seeing him as if from a distance. When had he become so focused on optimization, on turning every experience into a calculated advantage? When had their daughter's joy become secondary to her marketability? More importantly, when had Evelyn stopped fighting for the things that mattered? They returned to their room in companionable silence, the kind that had once felt comfortable, but now seemed heavy with unspoken words. Marcus immediately set up his laptop on the desk, muttering about emails that needed responses before Monday. Evelyn changed into her pajamas, sensible cotton ones that covered everything from neck to ankle, and settled into bed with her romance novel. But as she tried to lose herself in the story of a heroine who was brave and beautiful and fought for what she wanted, her mind kept drifting to the woman she'd been before marriage, before motherhood, before she'd learned to make herself small enough to fit into the spaces other people created for her. Evelyn Marie Cooper had been 26 years old when she met Marcus Thomas at a legal conference in Chicago. She'd been the youngest marketing director in her company's history, confident enough to wear red lipstick to board meetings, and bold enough to challenge senior partners when she thought they were wrong. She had opinions about everything: politics, movies, the best way to make coffee, whether cilantro was a gift from the gods or a conspiracy by people with broken taste buds. That woman had worn bikinis without shame, had danced until closing time at wedding receptions, had once driven 4 hours to try a restaurant she'd read about in a magazine. She'd been fully herself, unapologetically and completely. What had happened to her?
Travel. Someone mentioned wanting to visit Morocco, and Evelyn had felt a surge of excitement. "I've always wanted to go to Marrakesh," she'd said, leaning forward. "The colors, the markets, the architecture, it seems like such an incredible sensory experience." The table had gone quiet for a moment, and she'd seen Marcus's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Evelyn's not really a traveler," he'd said smoothly, his hand finding hers under the table, his grip just firm enough to be a message. "She prefers familiar places, less anxiety that way." The conversation had moved on, but Evelyn had felt something die inside her. When had her husband decided she wasn't a traveler? When had her preferences been reassigned without her consent? Later, in the car, she'd asked him about it. "I am a traveler, Marcus. I went backpacking through Europe in college. I've been to 12 countries. "That was before," he'd said, his voice gentle but firm. "Before you had responsibilities. Before you had a family to think about. People change, Ev. You're more mature now." More mature. The phrase had haunted her for weeks. Was that what maturity meant? The systematic elimination of dreams that didn't fit into neat, predictable boxes? Now, lying in a luxury resort bed while her husband answered emails about briefs and depositions and billable hours, Evelyn wondered when she'd stopped fighting for Morocco, for red lipstick, for piña coladas and loud laughter, and the right to take up space in the world. She thought about Sarah, who was 15 and still believed she could be anything. Sarah, who wanted to join drama club not because it would look good on college applications, but because she loved the way words sounded when they were spoken with intention, with passion. Sarah, who still argued with her father when he tried to optimize her choices, who still believed her dreams mattered more than their strategic value. Evelyn's daughter was everything she used to be and everything she'd forgotten how to be. The thought filled her with pride and terror in equal measure. Pride because Sarah was magnificent, and terror because Evelyn could see how easily that magnificence could be worn away, one small accommodation at a time. "You're overthinking again," Marcus said without looking up from his laptop. "I can practically hear the gears turning from here." She turned toward him, studying his profile in the blue glow of his screen. He was still handsome at 42, still had the kind of sharp jawline and intelligent eyes that had made her heart skip beats when they first met. But when was the last time he'd looked at her the same way? When was the last time he'd seen her as something other than a problem to be managed, a wife to be optimized? "Do you remember our first vacation together?" Marcus's fingers paused on the keyboard.
Costa Rica. You got food poisoning from that street vendor. Before that, she said, when we went to Napa, you'd never been wine tasting, and I convinced you to try it. A smile ghosted across his lips, the first genuine expression she'd seen from him all day. You were terrible at spitting out the wine. You kept swallowing it during the tastings. I was terrible at wasting good wine, she corrected. There's a difference. He saved his document and turned to face her, really face her, for the first time, and she couldn't remember how long. We got completely drunk at that last vineyard, had to call a cab back to the hotel. And we had the best conversation, she said, remembering, about books and dreams and whether we wanted kids. You said you'd never met anyone who argued with you as intelligently as I did. You still do. But they both knew it wasn't true. When was the last time she'd disagreed with him about anything more significant than what to watch on Netflix? Do I? She asked softly. He was quiet for a long moment, and she wondered if he could see what she was seeing, the gradual disappearance of the woman he'd fallen in love with, replaced by someone more convenient, but infinitely less interesting.
You've gotten more peaceful, he said finally. It's nice, less complicated. Less complicated? She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the romance novel across the room and demand to know when peace had become synonymous with silence, when being less complicated had meant becoming less herself. Instead, she nodded and returned to her book, but the words blurred together as tears she refused to shed made reading impossible. Across the room, Marcus returned to his laptop, already forgetting their conversation in favor of whatever legal crisis demanded his immediate attention. Evelyn lay in the dark, listening to the sound of waves outside their window and the steady clicking of computer keys that had become the soundtrack of their marriage. Tomorrow they would go snorkeling, and she would wear her modest one-piece and pretend to be comfortable, while Marcus took carefully framed photos that made their relationship look happy and functional for their social media feeds. But tonight, in the space between sleep and waking, she let herself remember the woman who had convinced a skeptical lawyer to go wine tasting, who had swallowed every drop because good wine deserved better than the sink, who had argued intelligently about everything and been loved for it, not despite it. That woman was still inside her somewhere, buried under years of accommodations and optimizations, and the gradual erosion of everything that made her, specifically, uniquely herself. But she was there, waiting. Evelyn just had to decide if she was brave enough to dig her out. The snorkeling excursion began at 7 a.m. with the kind of artificial enthusiasm that resort activities coordinators seem to cultivate like a specialized skill. Evelyn stood on the dock in her black one-piece, a sarong wrapped around her waist like apology for taking up space, while Marcus checked his waterproof phone case for the third time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Paradise Cove's premier snorkeling adventure. The guide, a sun-weathered man named Captain Joe, with the kind of perpetual tan that suggested he'd been born on the water, gestured toward the gleaming catamaran bobbing in the marina. Today, we'll be visiting two of the most beautiful reef systems in the Bahamas. The other couples boarding the boat seemed to glow with vacation confidence. There was the redhead from the volleyball game, whose name Evelyn learned from overhearing conversations, was Diana, wearing a vibrant purple bikini and laughing at something her husband said. Another couple, probably in their 50s, had matching snorkeling gear and the comfortable body language of people who'd spent decades being completely themselves with each other. And then there was Evelyn, tugging at her sarong and trying to convince herself that her churning stomach was seasickness rather than shame. First time snorkeling? Diana asked, settling onto the bench beside her as the boat pulled away from the dock. Up close, she was even more striking. Not conventionally beautiful in the magazine sense, but radiant with the kind of confidence that made conventional beauty seem irrelevant. It's been a while, Evelyn admitted, which wasn't technically a lie. She'd gone snorkeling on their honeymoon in Hawaii, back when she'd worn a red bikini that Marcus had chosen specifically because he said it made her look like a movie star.
I'm Diana, by the way. Diana Martinez. That's my husband Paul over there, comparing underwater cameras with your husband like they're teenage boys with new video games. Evelyn looked toward the front of the boat, where Marcus and Paul were indeed engaged in an animated discussion about megapixels and waterproof ratings. It was the most enthusiasm she had seen from Marcus since they'd arrived, and something about that realization made her chest tight. Evelyn Thomas, she said, and you're right about the video game thing. Marcus gets that same look when he talks about legal precedents. Diana laughed, a sound that was completely unself-conscious and utterly infectious. Lawyer, huh? Paul's an engineer. Same species, different habitat. They both think the world can be solved with the right equipment and enough data.
As the boat cut through crystal-clear water toward their first snorkeling site, Diana proved to be the kind of person who could make conversation with a fence post. She was 43, a high school principal from Phoenix, mother of 3 teenagers who, according to the photos on her phone, had inherited their mother's confidence and joy. She had been married to Paul for 18 years, and they took an annual adults-only vacation that was sacred territory, protected from work and children and all the demands of real life. "This is our 4th time to the Bahamas," Diana said, slathering sunscreen on her arms with the casual efficiency of someone completely comfortable in her skin. "We fell in love with it during our first trip here. There's something about the water. It's like being inside a piece of jewelry." Evelyn watched Diana move around the boat, chatting easily with other passengers, helping an elderly man adjust his snorkel mask, offering sunscreen to anyone who looked like they might need it. She was naturally generous with her attention, her laughter, her presence, everything Evelyn had learned to ration carefully. When had she started treating her own joy like a finite resource? "First snorkeling site coming up," Captain Joe announced as they approached a section of water that looked identical to every other section to Evelyn's untrained eye. "The reef here is about 12 feet down, perfect for beginners and experienced snorkelers alike. Water temperature is 82 degrees, visibility is excellent, and we've got some friendly nurse sharks that like to cruise through around this time of day." Nurse sharks. Evelyn's stomach lurched, not from the boat's gentle rocking. "Don't worry," Diana said, noticing her expression. "Nurse sharks are basically the golden retrievers of the shark world, completely harmless. I swam with one for about 10 minutes last year. It was like having an underwater dance partner." The boat anchored, and Captain Joe launched into his safety briefing. Evelyn tried to focus on the instructions about breathing through the snorkel, clearing water from the mask, and staying relaxed, but her mind kept circling back to the woman she'd been on her honeymoon. That Evelyn had been the first one in the water, eager to explore, unafraid of what she might encounter beneath the surface. "You ready for this?" Marcus appeared beside her, already in his snorkeling gear. He looked competent and comfortable, like he approached everything else in life that way. "Remember, if you get tired, just float on your back and signal the boat." There it was again. The assumption that she needed management, that her capabilities required his oversight. The old Evelyn might have pointed out that she'd been swimming competitively in high school, that she probably knew more about water safety than he did. This Evelyn just nodded and reached for her mask. The water was exactly as Diana had described, like being inside a piece of jewelry. The moment her face went underwater, the world transformed into something magical and alien. Schools of bright yellow fish moved like living brushstrokes against the blue, while larger fish, in electric blues and greens, drifted past with the kind of casual elegance that belonged in dreams. But it was the coral that took her breath away. The reef stretched out below her like an underwater garden, all flowing shapes and impossible colors. Brain coral that looked exactly like its name, staghorn coral reaching toward the surface like underwater trees, and formations and colors she didn't have names for, purples and oranges and pinks that seemed to glow with internal light. For the first time in years, Evelyn forgot to monitor herself. She forgot to worry about how she looked from behind, whether her swimsuit was riding up,
whether Marcus was watching her with that expression of mild disappointment she'd grown accustomed to. She simply existed in the water, moving through liquid light, surrounded by beauty that demanded nothing from her except presence. A sea turtle glided past, ancient and graceful, and Evelyn found herself following it deeper toward the reef. The turtle moved with the kind of unhurried confidence that seemed to suggest it owned the ocean, that it had every right to be exactly where it was, exactly as it was. When had she last felt that way about anything?
She was so absorbed in watching the turtle that she didn't notice the nurse shark until it was directly below her, 6 feet of sleek gray muscle moving through the water with liquid efficiency, and for a moment, fear froze every muscle in her body. But then she remembered Diana's words, golden retrievers of the shark world. She forced herself to breathe steadily through her snorkel and watched as the shark glided past, completely uninterested in her presence. It was beautiful in its own way, perfectly adapted to its environment, comfortable in its own skin in a way that seemed both foreign and familiar. When she finally surfaced, gasping with exhilaration and something that felt dangerously close to joy, she found Diana floating nearby. "Incredible, right?" Diana called out. "Did you see the turtle?" "I followed it for about 10 minutes, Evelyn said, surprised by the enthusiasm in her own voice. "And there was a nurse shark. I saw you with it. You looked so peaceful. Some people panic the first time they see a shark, even a harmless one, but you just stayed with it." Evelyn felt something expand in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the tropical sun. When was the last time someone had noticed her being brave instead of cataloging her limitations? Back on the boat, as they traveled to the second snorkeling site, Marcus reviewed the underwater photos he'd taken with Paul's camera. "Got some good shots of the reef," he said, scrolling through images. "The visibility really was excellent." "Did you see the turtle?" Evelyn asked. "What turtle?" Marcus looked up from the camera's display screen. "The sea turtle. It was huge, probably 4 feet across. I followed it for about 10 minutes. Marcus frowned slightly. "I didn't see any turtle. Are you sure it wasn't just a large fish?" The dismissal was casual, automatic, but it hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She'd shared her joy, her moment of wonder, and he'd responded by questioning her ability to distinguish between a turtle and a fish, as if her experience wasn't quite real until he verified it. "It was definitely a turtle," Diana said firmly from across the deck. "Gorgeous old hawksbill, probably been cruising these reefs for decades." Marcus shrugged and returned to the camera, already losing interest. But Diana caught Evelyn's eye and smiled, and in that moment, Evelyn felt seen in a way that was both thrilling and heartbreaking. The second snorkeling site was even more spectacular than the first, a coral wall that dropped away into deep blue mystery, populated with fish that seemed to exist purely to demonstrate the ocean's sense of humor. They were fish that looked like living rainbows, fish with faces that seemed perpetually surprised, fish that moved in perfect synchronization like underwater dancers. Evelyn lost herself completely this time, drifting along the coral wall and letting the current carry her where it wanted. She felt weightless, graceful, free in a way that had nothing to do with the absence of gravity and everything to do with the absence of judgment. Underwater, there were no mirrors, no critical eyes, no voices suggesting she should cover up or slim down or take up less space. When she finally surfaced, she found herself near the stern of the boat, alone, except for Captain Joe, who was monitoring the snorkelers from the deck. "You're a natural," he called down to her. "Most first-timers spend half their time worrying about the equipment, but you look like you belong down there." The compliment settled into her chest like warm honey. "Thank you. It's incredible." "Been doing this for 30 years and I still get that feeling," Joe said. "The ocean has a way of reminding you who you really are, you know? Strips away all the noise and just leaves the truth." Evelyn floated on her back, staring up at the cloudless sky, and wondered what truth the ocean was trying to show her. Around her, other snorkelers were surfacing and sharing excited observations. "Look at those angelfish. Did you see the octopus? The water's so warm." Their voices carrying the kind of unbridled enthusiasm that she had trained herself to moderate. When had excitement become embarrassing? When had wonder become something to apologize for? Back on the boat for the return journey, Diana found her again. "You looked completely transformed down there," she said, toweling off her hair, like the water woke something up in you. Evelyn felt her cheeks warm with something between pleasure and embarrassment. "I used to love swimming before, well, before life got complicated." "Life doesn't have to be complicated," Diana said gently. "Sometimes we just make it that way because we forget we have choices." The words hung in the air between them, carrying weight that seemed disproportionate to their simplicity. Choices. When had Evelyn last felt like she had choices about anything that mattered? "Ladies, you're missing the photo opportunity of a lifetime," Paul called from the front of the boat, where he and Marcus were taking turns posing with the reef in the background. Diana rolled her eyes affectionately. "Duty calls. But Evelyn, keep that feeling you had down there. Don't let anyone convince you it wasn't real." As Diana walked away to join the photo session, her words echoed in Evelyn's mind. "Don't let anyone convince you it wasn't real." It seemed like such a small thing, but it felt revolutionary. The idea that her experience, her joy, her truth didn't require external validation to be legitimate. The boat ride back to the resort passed in a haze of shared stories and sun-warmed contentment. Other passengers compared notes about what they'd seen, swapped photos, made plans to do it again. Evelyn found herself drawn into conversations in a way that felt both natural and surprising. When had she last talked to strangers without Marcus mediating the interaction? "That was incredible," she told Captain Joe as they docked at the marina. "Thank you for such a beautiful morning." "Thank you for bringing good energy," he replied. "Some folks come out here and spend the whole time worried about their hair or their tan lines. You actually experienced it." Walking back to their room, Evelyn felt lighter somehow, as if the salt water had dissolved something heavy she'd been carrying without realizing it. But the feeling began to evaporate the moment they entered their suite, and Marcus immediately opened his laptop. "I need to review the Henderson contract before tomorrow's conference call. Why don't you go get some lunch? I'll catch up with you later." The dismissal was gentle but absolute. Evelyn stood there for a moment, still glowing with the memory of swimming alongside ancient creatures in crystal-clear water, and watched her husband disappear into the world of billable hours and legal precedents that seemed to matter more than anything happening in their actual life. She changed into a sundress, navy blue, appropriately modest, and walked to the resort's casual dining area alone. The lunch crowd was a mix of families with sun-tired children and couples sharing plates and inside jokes. Evelyn found a table on the terrace overlooking the pool and ordered a salad, automatically choosing the lightest option on the menu. "Mind if I join you?" Diana appeared at her table, lunch tray in hand. "Paul's having a technology emergency, something about uploading photos to the cloud, and I refuse to spend a beautiful afternoon watching him swear at his laptop." "Please," Evelyn said, gesturing to the empty chair. "Marcus is having his own technology emergency. Legal contracts, apparently." Diana settled across from her with a plate that contained what looked like a celebration of Caribbean cuisine: jerk chicken, rice and beans, plantains, and something colorful that Evelyn couldn't identify, but that smelled incredible. "Try this," Diana said, pushing a forkful of plantains across the table. "It's like happiness in food form." Evelyn hesitated. The plantains looked sweet, indulgent, nothing like the carefully controlled portions she'd grown accustomed to. "I probably shouldn't." "Oh, come on," Diana interrupted. "When's the last time you ate something just because it made you happy?" The question hit deeper than it should have. When was the last time she'd done anything just because it made her happy? Evelyn took the bite, and the sweetness exploded on her tongue, caramelized and rich and completely unapologetic about its indulgence. "That's incredible," she said, surprised by her own enthusiasm. Right? I've been trying to recreate this recipe at home for 3 years. My teenagers think I'm obsessed, but some obsessions are worth having. They ate in comfortable companionship, Diana sharing bites of her various dishes while Evelyn slowly worked through her salad. But something about Diana's generous spirit and complete lack of judgment made Evelyn bold. "Can I ask you something?" she said. How do you stay so confident, so comfortable with yourself?" Diana paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. "That's a loaded question. Can I ask why you're asking?" Evelyn looked out at the pool, where families were playing Marco Polo and couples were sharing fruity drinks in the shallow end. "I feel like I've forgotten how to be myself." Does that make sense? Like, I've spent so many years being what other people needed me to be that I don't remember what I actually want anymore. "Oh, honey," Diana said softly, "that makes perfect sense, and it's more common than you think. But you seem so, I don't know, sure of yourself. Like, you know exactly who you are, and you're completely okay with it." Diana laughed, but it wasn't her usual bright sound. This was quieter, more complicated. "Can I tell you a secret? 5 years ago, I was a completely different person. Smaller, quieter, constantly apologizing for taking up space. I wore beige almost exclusively because I thought it made me less noticeable." Evelyn's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "What happened?" "I had what I like to call my purple bikini moment," Diana said, her eyes growing distant. "Paul and I were at a resort in Mexico, and I saw this gorgeous purple bikini in the hotel shop. It was exactly my size, but it was bold, bright, the kind of thing that demanded attention. I tried it on, and for about 30 seconds, I felt like a goddess." "What did you do?" "I put it back on the rack and bought a black one-piece instead, just like I always did. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about how I felt in that purple bikini, how alive I looked, how happy. And I realized I'd been making choices based on what I thought other people could handle rather than what I actually wanted anymore." Diana took a sip of her tropical drink, something pink and garnished with enough fruit to qualify as a small salad. "So the next morning, I went back to the shop and bought the purple bikini. Paul barely looked up from his newspaper when I walked out wearing it, but I felt different. Like I was taking up exactly the right amount of space for the first time in years. And that was it? One bikini changed everything?" "It wasn't the bikini," Diana said. "It was the choice. The decision to stop shrinking myself to fit other people's comfort zones. It was the first time in years I'd chosen joy over acceptance. And once I remembered what that felt like," she shrugged, "it got easier to keep choosing it." Evelyn thought about the emerald bikini in her suitcase, tag still attached, dreams still deferred. What if the people around you don't like the changes? What if they preferred the smaller version? Diana's expression grew serious. Then you have to ask yourself, do they love you or do they love the convenience of a woman who doesn't challenge them? Because there's a difference, and it's not a small one. The words hit Evelyn like a physical force. Love versus convenience. How long had she been confusing the two? "I bought a bikini for this trip," she said quietly. "Green, like the color of the water this morning. But I haven't worn it." "Why not?" Evelyn's throat tightened. "My husband said I was too fat for the beach." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Diana set down her drink carefully, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who spent years managing teenagers and their infinite capacity for cruelty. "Your husband is wrong," she said flatly. "Not just about your body, but about his right to police it. You're a grown woman, Evelyn. You get to decide what you wear and where you wear it." "It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple. Complicated is something we do to ourselves when we're afraid of simple truths." Diana leaned forward. "You want to know what I saw this morning when you were snorkeling? I saw a woman who was completely alive, graceful, curious, unafraid. That woman exists, Evelyn. She's not gone. She's just been buried under a lot of other people's opinions." After lunch, they parted ways with plans to meet for dinner at the resort's beachside grill. Diana hugged her goodbye, the kind of full-contact embrace that Evelyn realized she hadn't experienced in years. When was the last time someone had hugged her like she mattered? Like her presence was a gift rather than an obligation. Back in her room, Marcus was still absorbed in his laptop, surrounded by the detritus of legal work. Printed documents, yellow highlighters, coffee cups that had gone cold hours ago. He looked up when she entered, blinking as if returning from another dimension. "How was lunch?" he asked absently. "Good. I met that woman from the snorkeling trip, Diana. We're going to have dinner together tonight at the beach grill." Marcus frowned. "I already made reservations at the main dining room. The Henderson client wants to discuss some additional terms, and I thought we could talk through them over dinner." The automatic assumption that her plans were secondary to his work hit Evelyn with familiar resignation. But something about the morning's freedom, about Diana's words, made her pause. "Can't you discuss it with them tomorrow? We're supposed to be on vacation." "I can't reschedule a client call around your social plans, Evelyn. Be reasonable." Reasonable, another word that had lost its meaning through overuse, deployed whenever her needs conflicted with his convenience. She looked at her husband, still handsome, still successful, still convinced that his priorities were naturally more important than hers, and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. "Then you'll have to have dinner alone," she said quietly. Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "What?" "I said I'd be there, so I'll be there. You can order room service if you need to work."
Evelyn, you're being ridiculous. Cancel with this woman you just met and have dinner with your husband. That's how marriage works. The phrase hung in the air between them. That's how marriage works. As if marriage were a business contract with clearly defined terms that favored one party over the other. As if her role was to be available for his needs while her own remained perpetually flexible. "Maybe," she said, moving toward the bathroom to get ready, "that's not how our marriage should work anymore." She closed the bathroom door behind her, shutting out his sputtered protests and demands for clarification. In the mirror, she saw a woman who looked different than she had that morning. Not dramatically, the changes were subtle, like the way her spine seemed straighter, the way her eyes held direct contact with their reflection instead of sliding away. The emerald bikini was still in her suitcase, price tags attached like small white flags of surrender. Evelyn picked it up, feeling the weight of fabric and possibility in her hands. Diana's words echoed in her mind. You get to decide what you wear and where you wear it. For the first time in years, Evelyn Thomas decided to choose joy over acceptance. The emerald bikini fit perfectly, just as it had in the store 3 months ago. But standing in front of the hotel bathroom mirror, Evelyn barely recognized the woman looking back at herself. It wasn't just the swimsuit, though the color did bring out her hazel eyes exactly as the saleswoman had promised. It was something in her posture, the way she held her shoulders, the direct gaze that didn't flinch away from its own reflection. She looked like someone who belonged in her own skin. The beach grill was exactly the kind of place Evelyn would have avoided in her previous life. Casual, unpretentious, populated by people who seemed more concerned with enjoying their food than photographing it for social media. Tiki torches created pools of warm light along the sand, and the sound of steel drums mixed with laughter and the gentle rush of waves. Diana was already seated at a table near the water's edge, her vibrant coral sundress flowing in the evening breeze. She looked up as Evelyn approached, and her face broke into a delighted grin. "Look at you!" she exclaimed, standing to embrace her new friend. "You look absolutely radiant. That color is perfect on you." Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks, but it was the warmth of pleasure rather than shame. "I almost hadn't had the nerve to wear it." "But you did. That's what matters." Diana gestured to the chair across from her. "Paul's still wrestling with technology, by the way. Something about the Wi-Fi not being fast enough for his video uploads. I told him I'd see him when he remembered he was supposed to be on vacation." They ordered drinks. Evelyn finally got her piña colada. Diana opted for something called a Goombay smash that arrived in a glass large enough to bathe a small pet. and settled in to watch the sunset paint the sky in impossible shades of orange and pink. "So," Diana said, taking a generous sip of her drink, "how did your husband react to the bikini?" Evelyn's smile faltered slightly. "He wasn't there when I left. Still working. On vacation. At 7 p.m. On an island paradise. The Henderson account is worth 7 figures," Evelyn recited automatically, then caught herself. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm defending him." "Habit," Diana said gently. "We all do it. Make excuses for the people we love, even when their behavior is inexcusable." Their server, a young woman with intricate braids and a smile that seemed to come from somewhere deep and genuine, approached to take their dinner orders. Evelyn found herself studying the menu with actual interest for the first time in years, drawn to descriptions that used words like bold and indulgent and celebration of flavors.
"I'll have the jerk lobster," she said, surprising herself, "with the coconut rice and the plantains." Diana raised her glass in approval. "Excellent choice. I'm getting the whole snapper with mango salsa. Life's too short for boring food." As they waited for their meals, other diners began to fill the beachside tables. Evelyn found herself people-watching in a way she hadn't done in years, actually seeing the couples and families around them, instead of constantly monitoring her own appearance for potential embarrassment. There was an elderly couple sharing a massive plate of conch fritters, feeding each other bites and laughing at private jokes. A family with 3 young children, all of whom were covered in sand and completely delighted about it. 2 women around Evelyn's age celebrating what looked like an anniversary, their wedding rings catching the torchlight as they held hands across their cable. "What are you thinking about?" Diana asked, following her gaze. "All these people just being themselves, being happy without apologizing for it." Evelyn paused, trying to articulate something she'd never put into words. "I feel like I've spent years being afraid that my happiness might be inconvenient for someone else." "And how's that working out for you?" The question was gentle but direct, and it hit Evelyn with the force of recognition. How was it working out? She had a successful career, a beautiful home, a daughter she adored, financial security most people could only dream of. On paper, her life was perfect. So why did she feel like she was disappearing? Their food arrived in a parade of colors and aromas that seemed designed to assault the senses in the most wonderful way. Evelyn's jerk lobster was sweet and spicy and completely indulgent, nothing like the grilled chicken and steamed vegetables that had become her default selections. Each bite was a small rebellion against the voice in her head that cataloged calories and consequences. "This is incredible," she said, closing her eyes to better savor the complex flavors. "Food tastes better when you're not afraid of it," Diana observed, working efficiently through her whole snapper. "I spent years ordering the most boring thing on every menu because I was worried about, I don't even know what I was worried about, looking greedy, taking up too much space, enjoying myself too obviously." Evelyn nodded, recognizing the familiar anxiety. "Marcus says I have a sensitive stomach, that rich food makes me uncomfortable, but I'm starting to think maybe it wasn't the food that was making me uncomfortable." They ate in companionable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky as stars began to appear. The steel drum music shifted to something slower, more romantic, and several couples got up to dance on the small area of sand that had been designated as an impromptu dance floor. "May I ask you something personal?" Diana asked, setting down her fork. "How long has it been since you felt genuinely happy? Not content, not satisfied, but actually happy?" The question should have been easy to answer. Evelyn searched her memory for moments of pure joy, the kind of happiness that bubbled up from somewhere deep and irrepressible. Sarah's graduation from middle school? No, that had been tainted by Marcus's complaints about the ceremony running long. Her promotion to senior marketing director?
Marcus immediately started talking about how the increased responsibilities might affect her availability for family obligations. "I don't remember," she said finally, the admission feeling like a small death. Diana reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Then let's start with right now. This moment, this meal, this conversation. You're happy right now, aren't you?" Evelyn considered the question seriously. She was sitting on a beach in paradise, wearing a swimsuit she'd been afraid to put on, eating food that made her taste buds sing, talking to someone who saw her as interesting and worthwhile. Her husband was probably still hunched over his laptop, choosing legal precedents over the actual paradise surrounding him. And she was happy. Genuinely, uncomplicated happy for the first time in she couldn't remember how long.
"Yes," she said, surprised by the simplicity of it. "I am happy." "Good. Remember this feeling. Write it down if you have to, because this is what you're aiming for. This is your baseline now. Not contentment, not the absence of conflict, but actual joy." The steel drum shifted to a song that was purely infectious, all rhythm and celebration. Several tables of diners had given up any pretense of eating and were dancing with abandon, their laughter mixing with the music in a symphony of unself-conscious pleasure. "Dance with me," Diana said, standing and extending her hand. "I don't really dance," Evelyn started to say automatically, but Diana was having none of it. "That's not true. Everyone dances. Some people just do it when no one's watching." She pulled her gently to her feet. "Besides, look around. Half these people couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, but they're having the time of their lives." The sand was warm beneath their bare feet, and the music seemed to vibrate through the ground and into Evelyn's bones. Diana danced like she did everything else, with complete commitment and zero self-consciousness, her movements fluid and joyful and utterly infectious. At first, Evelyn moved tentatively, hyper-aware of who might be watching, how she might look to observers. But the music was relentless, and Diana's enthusiasm was impossible to resist. Gradually, she found herself letting go, her body remembering rhythms she'd forgotten she knew. When was the last time she'd danced? High school, probably? Maybe college? Certainly not with Marcus, who considered dancing a frivolous waste of time that served no practical purpose. But here, with sand between her toes and stars overhead and music that seemed designed to remind her body it was capable of joy, Evelyn rediscovered something she'd lost without realizing it was gone. She was graceful. She was sensual. She was completely, unapologetically alive. "There she is," Diana called over the music. "There's the woman from this morning, the one who swam with sharks and followed sea turtles." Other dancers had noticed them now, and instead of judgment, Evelyn found only encouragement. A young couple made room for them in the loose circle that had formed. An elderly man tipped his hat in appreciation. A group of women around their age cheered when Evelyn successfully executed a spin that would have terrified her an hour ago. She was taking up space, physical space, emotional space, the kind of space she'd spent years apologizing for occupying. And the world didn't end. In fact, it got bigger, more colorful, more full of possibility. The song ended, and the dancers applauded each other with the kind of generous appreciation that comes from shared joy. Evelyn found herself laughing, breathless and exhilarated, and completely present in her own skin. "You're a beautiful dancer," the elderly man said as they walked back to their table. "Your husband is a lucky fellow." The comment should have made her happy, but instead it landed with a strange weight. Where was her husband while she was discovering pieces of herself she'd forgotten existed? Still hunched over legal briefs, still choosing work over the woman he'd promised to love and cherish. "Thank you," she said simply. They ordered dessert. Key lime pie that was tart and sweet and completely unnecessary except for the pure pleasure of it.
and talked about everything and nothing. Diana shared stories about her teenager's latest adventures in creative rebellion. Evelyn found herself talking about Sarah's poetry, her dream of maybe writing a novel someday, the way she saw the world in metaphors and images that took Evelyn's breath away. "She sounds incredible," Diana said. "You must be so proud." "I am, but I worry about her sometimes. She's so uncompromising, so sure of what she wants. I'm afraid the world will wear that down."
Or maybe she'll change the world instead, Diana suggested. Maybe she'll refuse to be worn down, and maybe that will give other people permission to be equally uncompromising about their joy. The words hung between them, loaded with implication. Maybe Sarah's uncompromising nature wasn't something to be worried about, but something to be learned from. Maybe the world didn't need another woman who made herself smaller for other people's comfort. It was nearly 11 when they finally left the restaurant, both slightly drunk on rum and possibility. Diana walked her back toward the resort's main building, their path lit by torches and the kind of starlight that only existed far from city pollution. "Thank you," Evelyn said as they reached the elevator bank, "for today, for seeing something in me that I'd forgotten was there." "I didn't see anything that wasn't already there," Diana replied. "I just reminded you to look." The elevator arrived, and Diana stepped inside, turning back to face her new friend. "One last thing, Evelyn. That bikini, wear it tomorrow. Not for anyone else, but for yourself. For the woman who danced on the beach tonight and remembered she was magnificent." The elevator doors closed, leaving Evelyn alone in the marble lobby with her thoughts and the lingering taste of key lime pie and the revolutionary idea that her own happiness might be reason enough for anything. She took the stairs instead of waiting for the next elevator, climbing slowly, letting each step solidify her resolve. The woman who had left this hotel room 3 hours ago in terror of being seen was not the same woman returning. This woman had danced under stars, had eaten food that made her moan with pleasure, had been complimented by strangers, and felt beautiful in her own skin. This woman had remembered she was allowed to take up space. The room was dark when she entered, lit only by the blue glow of Marcus's laptop screen. He was still awake, still working, surrounded by the same papers and coffee cups she'd left him with. He looked up when she entered, and she saw his eyes take in her appearance. The slightly mussed hair, the sand still clinging to her feet, and the unmistakable glow of someone who had spent the evening being genuinely happy. "You're late," he said, his tone carrying just enough disapproval to let him know this was a problem. "Am I?" she said, moving to the mirror to remove her earrings. In the reflection, she could see Marcus watching her, his expression unreadable. "You tried calling me. Your phone went straight to voicemail." She had turned off her phone during dinner, a small act of rebellion that had felt enormous at the time. "I was having dinner with Diana. You knew that." "Until 11:30? What kind of dinner lasts until 11:30? The accusation in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. She was being cross-examined, asked to account for her time like a teenager who had missed curfew. The old Evelyn would have apologized, would have offered detailed explanations and reassurances that nothing inappropriate had happened. This Evelyn turned to face her husband directly. "The kind where you're having fun," she said simply. Marcus's expression shifted, as if he was seeing something in her face that he didn't recognize. "You've been drinking." It wasn't a question, but it wasn't quite an accusation either. It was something in between, an observation wrapped in judgment. "I had a piña colada with dinner, and we shared a bottle of wine. Diana's husband is a sommelier. He recommended something local." She paused, studying Marcus's face. "Is that a problem?"
She didn't usually do a lot of things.
She didn't usually wear bikinis or dance with strangers or eat jerk lobster or stay out until midnight. She didn't usually choose her own happiness over other people's convenience. But apparently she did now. "We danced on the beach," she said, still looking directly at him. "There was a steel drum band, and other people were dancing, so we joined them. It was wonderful." Marcus closed his laptop with a sound that seemed louder than necessary. "You danced. On the beach. With strangers. With Diana and about 20 other people. It wasn't a rave, Marcus. It was just joy. People celebrating being alive on a beautiful night in a beautiful place. And it didn't occur to you that this might not be appropriate? A married woman dancing with strangers while her husband is working?" The words hit her like cold water. Inappropriate. As if joy itself was somehow a betrayal of her marriage vows. As if being fully alive was a violation of some contract she'd never agreed to sign. "You chose to work," she said quietly. "I invited you to dinner. I asked you to come with me. You chose legal briefs over experiencing paradise with your wife. This is my job, Evelyn. This is how I provide for our family. And this is my life," she replied. "This is my one life, and I'm tired of living it on hold, waiting for some day when you'll have time for the actual experience of being alive." The silence that followed was heavy with years of unspoken resentments and accommodations that had calcified into habits. Marcus looked at her as if she were speaking a foreign language, as if the woman who had spent 8 years accommodating his schedule and his preferences and his definition of appropriate had been replaced by someone he didn't recognize. Maybe she had been. "I don't understand what's gotten into you," he said finally. "This isn't like you. Maybe this is exactly like me. Maybe I've just forgotten who I was underneath all the people I thought I was supposed to be." She moved toward the bathroom, but Marcus's voice stopped her at the door. "That bikini is too small for you." The words were quiet, almost casual, but they landed with the precision of surgical instruments. Evelyn felt them hit their target, felt the familiar shame rise in her throat, the automatic impulse to apologize and cover herself and disappear. But something else rose too, something that tasted like key lime pie and sounded like steel drums and felt like the warm sand of a beach where strangers had cheered her dancing. "No," she said, turning back to face him. "It's not." And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Evelyn Thomas went to bed knowing exactly who she was. The morning brought both clarity and consequences. Evelyn awoke before dawn, her body still humming with the memory of dancing under stars, her mind clearer than it had been in years. Beside her, Marcus slept with the deep stillness of someone whose conscience never kept him awake, surrounded by legal documents that had apparently been more compelling than the woman he'd married. She slipped from bed quietly and walked to the balcony where the pre-dawn sky was painted in shades of lavender and gold. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, and she thought about the woman who had swum in those waters yesterday morning. How free she had felt, how completely herself. That woman seemed both foreign and familiar, like remembering a language she'd once spoken fluently but had forgotten through disuse. Her phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Early morning swim? Meet me at the beach in 20 minutes if you're interested. Wear the bikini."
The emoji was a small thing, but it made Evelyn smile. When was the last time someone had sent her an emoji that wasn't functional? A thumbs up for confirmation, a clock for scheduling, something utilitarian rather than playful. Diana communicated in the language of joy, and Evelyn realized she'd been starving for exactly that kind of lightness. She put on the emerald bikini without hesitation this time, covering it with a flowing white cover-up that she could remove easily. The woman in the mirror looked different than she had even yesterday. There was something in her posture, a straightness to her spine, that spoke of decisions made and boundaries drawn. Marcus stirred as she prepared to leave, opening one eye to check the time on his phone before focusing on her outfit. "Where are you going so early?" Swimming with Diana, she said, applying sunscreen with practiced efficiency. We're going to watch the sunrise from the water. It's 6 a.m., Evelyn. Normal people don't swim at 6 a.m. She paused in her sunscreen application. Maybe I'm not interested in being normal anymore. The words hung in the air between them, carrying weight that surprised them both. Marcus sat up in bed, suddenly more awake. What's that supposed to mean? Evelyn capped the sunscreen and turned to face her husband fully. In the pale morning light filtering through the curtains, he looked older somehow, more tired. Or maybe she was just seeing him clearly for the first time in years. This is about yesterday, isn't it? About what I said about the bikini? This is about 8 years of yesterdays, she said gently but firmly. About all the times I made myself smaller instead of asking why everyone else couldn't handle me being exactly who I am. She left him processing that statement and made her way to the beach, where Diana was already in the water, floating on her back and watching the sky lighten. The beach was empty except for a few early morning joggers and someone practicing yoga near the tide line. "You came," Diana called as Evelyn approached the water's edge. "I almost didn't," Evelyn admitted, dropping her cover up on a nearby beach chair. "Old habits die hard." "But new habits are more fun," Diana said, swimming closer to shore. "The water's perfect, like swimming in silk." Evelyn waded in slowly, letting her body adjust to the temperature and the sensation of water against her skin without the barrier of a modest one piece. The bikini felt like freedom, like a small flag of rebellion against years of hiding. They swam out beyond the breakers, where the water was deep and calm and the color of liquid emeralds. Above them, the sky continued its daily transformation from night to day, painting the clouds in shades of pink and orange that seemed too beautiful to be accidental. "Can I tell you something?" Diana said, treading water nearby. "Yesterday, watching you discover yourself, it reminded me why I became a principal." Evelyn raised her eyebrows. "Swimming in bikinis reminded you of high school administration?" Diana laughed. "The moment when someone realizes they're capable of more than they thought. It's the same expression teenagers get when they discover they're actually good at something, when they stop apologizing for their talents and start celebrating them."
They floated together in comfortable silence, watching the sun break the horizon and transform the entire ocean into liquid gold. Other early swimmers began to appear, dedicated fitness enthusiasts and fellow sunrise worshipers who understood that some experiences were worth getting up early for. "My husband thinks I'm having a midlife crisis," Evelyn said eventually. "Are you?" Evelyn considered the question seriously. "I don't think so. A midlife crisis implies you're trying to become someone you're not. I think I'm just trying to become someone I always was but forgot how to be." "That sounds like the opposite of a crisis to me. That sounds like coming home." Coming home. The phrase resonated in Evelyn's chest like a struck bell. When was the last time she'd felt at home in her own skin, in her own choices, in her own life? They swam until the sun was fully up and the beach began to populate with families and couples starting their vacation days. As they walked back toward their towels, Evelyn noticed they were garnering attention, not the judgmental kind she'd feared, but appreciative glances and friendly smiles from other beachgoers. "Excuse me," called a woman from a nearby lounge chair. She appeared to be in her 30s, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested she was working up courage for something. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you both look so confident and beautiful. I've been sitting here for an hour trying to work up the nerve to take off my cover-up, and watching you two just own your space like that, it's inspiring." Diana immediately walked over, her warmth extending naturally to the stranger. "What's your name, honey?" "Jessica. I'm here with my boyfriend for our anniversary, but I've been so worried about how I look in a swimsuit that I've barely gotten in the water." Evelyn felt her heart clench with recognition. She could have been this woman yesterday, paralyzed by the fear of being seen and found wanting. But something had shifted overnight. Some fundamental understanding about who got to decide her worth. "Can I tell you something?" Evelyn said, joining the conversation. "Yesterday morning, I was exactly where you are. I had a bikini in my suitcase that I was too afraid to wear because my husband told me I was too fat for the beach." Jessica's eyes widened. "What changed your mind?" Evelyn glanced at Diana, who nodded encouragingly. "I realized that my body isn't a problem to be solved or hidden. It's just mine. It's carried me through 40 years of life, given birth to my daughter, gotten me through long workdays and longer nights. It deserves to feel the sun and the water and the joy of being exactly what it is." "But what if people stare? What if they judge?" "Some people will," Diana said matter-of-factly, "but most people are too worried about their own insecurities to spend much time judging yours. And the ones who do judge, their opinion says nothing about you and everything about their own limitations." Jessica looked between them, something shifting in her expression. "Your husband really said you were too fat for the beach?" "He did. And for about 12 hours, I believed him. But then I remembered that his discomfort with my body is his problem, not mine." "What did you do?" Evelyn smiled, feeling the truth of her words settle into her bones. "I wore the bikini anyway. And you know what happened? The world didn't end. In fact, it got bigger and more colorful and more full of possibility."
"Oh," she breathed, looking down at her own body as if seeing it for the first time. I look good." "You look beautiful," Diana confirmed. "But more importantly, you look free." Jessica's boyfriend, who had been dozing under an umbrella, opened his eyes and sat up when he saw her. His face broke into a wide grin. "There's my gorgeous girlfriend. I was wondering when you'd show her off." The interaction was simple, but it crystallized something important for Evelyn. Jessica's boyfriend had been waiting for her to reveal herself, not because he found her lacking, but because he already knew she was beautiful. The problem hadn't been her body, it had been her relationship with her body. They spent the next hour on the beach together, an impromptu support group of women rediscovering their right to exist fully in their own skin. Jessica's confidence grew by increments, first walking to the water's edge, then wading in, then finally diving under a wave and coming up laughing with surprise at her own boldness. "This is incredible," she called out, floating on her back. "I feel like myself for the first time in months." Other women on the beach had begun to notice their small revolution. A mother with 2 young daughters asked Diana for advice about helping her girls develop healthy relationships with their bodies. An elderly woman shared stories about learning to swim at 70 because she decided life was too short to avoid anything that might bring joy. By the time they returned to their towels, Evelyn realized she'd become part of something larger than her personal transformation. She'd become an accidental ambassador for the radical idea that women deserved to take up space without apology. "I need to go get ready for breakfast," Jessica said, gathering her things. "But thank you, both of you. I feel like I woke up this morning as one person, and I'm going back to my room as someone completely different." "Not different," Evelyn corrected gently. "Just more yourself." After Jessica left, Diana and Evelyn walked slowly back toward the resort, their feet leaving temporary impressions in sand that would be washed smooth by the next tide. "That was something special," Diana said. "You have a gift for seeing people clearly. I think I just recognized the feeling of being lost in your own life. I spent so long being who everyone else needed me to be that I forgot who I actually was underneath all those expectations. And now?" Evelyn considered the question as they approached the pool area where resort guests were beginning to stake out prime lounging spots for the day. She felt different, not just in the bikini, not just in the way she moved through space without apology, but in something deeper, some fundamental shift in how she understood her place in the world. "Now I'm remembering that my happiness matters just as much as anyone else's, that my desires and dreams and preferences have value beyond their convenience for other people." They parted ways at the elevator with plans to meet for lunch if their husbands' various technology emergencies allowed. Evelyn rode to her floor feeling the pleasant tiredness that comes from exercise and sun and the peculiar exhaustion of personal growth.
Marcus was showered and dressed when she returned to her room, sitting on the balcony with his laptop and a cup of coffee that probably gone cold while he handled whatever crisis had arisen overnight in his absence. "How was your swim?" he asked without looking up from his screen. "Transformative," she said simply, moving past him toward the bathroom. "That's a strong word for exercise." She paused at the bathroom door. "It wasn't just exercise, Marcus. It was connection, joy, the kind of experience that reminds you why you're alive."
He looked up then, his expression cycling through confusion and irritation. "It was swimming, Evelyn. In the ocean. People do it every day without having religious experiences. Maybe that's their loss," she said gently. The shower was hot and restorative, washing away salt and sand, but leaving something essential intact, the feeling of being completely herself, unapologetically, and without reservation. She emerged from the bathroom to find Marcus pacing the room with his phone pressed to his ear. "I understand that, Jim, but the deposition is scheduled for Thursday, and we can't move it again without—" "What do you mean the witness is unavailable?" Evelyn moved around him quietly, selecting clothes for the day. Not black this time, not navy or beige or any of the colors that helped her disappear into backgrounds. She chose a sundress in coral, Diana's favorite color, that she'd packed but never worn, too bright for her usual palette, but perfect for the woman she was becoming. "I might need to cut the trip short," Marcus said after ending his call. "There's a crisis with the Henderson case, and—" "No," Evelyn said, quietly but with absolute certainty. Marcus stopped pacing. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no. You can cut your trip short if you need to, but I'm staying until Sunday as planned." "Evelyn, be reasonable. We came together, we'll go together. That's how this works." There it was again. That phrase that had become his default response to any behavior that didn't align with his preferences. That's how this works. As if relationships were machines with predetermined operating procedures rather than dynamic partnerships between two whole people. "Maybe that's not how this works anymore," she said, echoing her words from the night before. Marcus set down his phone and studied her face as if he were seeing her for the first time. "What's happening to you? This isn't like you at all." "I keep hearing that. But maybe this is exactly like me. Maybe I've just been performing a version of myself that was more convenient for everyone else." "Performing?" His voice carried genuine hurt now, mixed with confusion. "Is that what our marriage has been to you? A performance?" The question stopped her cold. She looked at her husband, still handsome, still successful, still the man she had fallen in love with 16 years ago, and felt her heart break for both of them. "Intentionally," she said softly, "but yes, I think it has been. I think I've been playing the role of the wife you needed rather than being the woman you married." "They're the same person, Evelyn." "No, they're not. The woman you married wore red lipstick and argued with you about everything and convinced you to go wine tasting even though you thought it was pretentious. She had opinions about Morocco and cilantro and the best way to load a dishwasher." Marcus set down his phone and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. "You still have opinions about the dishwasher?" "Do I? When's the last time I disagreed with you about anything that mattered? When's the last time I chose what I wanted over what you preferred?" The silence stretched between them, filled with years of small surrenders and accommodations that had calcified into habits neither of them had questioned. "I love you," Marcus said finally. "I've always loved you." "I know you do, but I'm starting to understand that there's a difference between loving someone and loving the convenience of someone who never challenges you, never demands anything, never takes up more space than you're comfortable with." Marcus's phone buzzed with another call, and Evelyn watched him glance at it automatically, his attention already divided. Even in the middle of the most important conversation they'd had in years, work took precedence. "Answer it," she said gently. "I'm going to have breakfast." "Evelyn, we're not finished talking about this." "We're not," she agreed, "but I'm finished explaining myself. When you're ready to have a conversation instead of a cross-examination, I'll be here." She left him with his phone and his crisis and his inability to choose his wife over his work, even for the length of one conversation. In the elevator, she caught her reflection in the mirrored walls and saw a woman who looked both familiar and foreign, someone who had remembered how to stand up straight, how to take up the exact amount of space she needed, how to exist without apology. The breakfast restaurant was bustling with families and couples fueling up for their vacation adventures. Evelyn found a table on the terrace overlooking the ocean and ordered eggs Benedict, rich, indulgent, exactly what she wanted without consideration for anyone else's opinion about her choices. As she waited for her food, she pulled out her phone and scrolled through photos from the past few days. There she was, yesterday morning, nervous and covered up, trying to disappear into the background. There she was last night, dancing on the beach with arms raised toward stars. The transformation was visible even in still images. The way she held her shoulders, the directness of her gaze, the absence of apology in her posture. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How's paradise, Mom? Dad's been sending work emails all morning. I hope you're having more fun than he is." Evelyn smiled and typed back, "I'm having the time of my life, sweetheart. Learning to take up space again." Sarah's response was immediate. "Good. You deserve to take up all the space you want. Love you." Her 15-year-old daughter understood something that apparently needed to be relearned, that Evelyn deserved to exist fully, completely, without diminishing herself for other people's comfort. It was both heartbreaking and inspiring to realize that Sarah had never forgotten what Evelyn had spent years trying to remember. As she ate her breakfast and watched other resort guests begin their days with the kind of unhurried joy that only vacation allowed, Evelyn made a decision that felt both monumental and perfectly natural. She was going to stop performing and start living. She was going to wear colors that made her happy and eat food that brought her pleasure and dance whenever music moved her. She was going to argue intelligently with people who could handle her intelligence and refuse to make herself smaller for people who couldn't. She was going to remember that her joy mattered, that her dreams had value, that her presence in the world was a gift rather than an imposition. And if that made other people uncomfortable, that was their limitation to address, not hers to accommodate. The law office of Marcus Thomas had the kind of polished perfection that existed to intimidate opposing counsel and impress potential clients. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city skyline, leather-bound legal tomes lined mahogany shelves, and everything was arranged to project an image of success and authority. But today, sitting across from Marcus at his imposing desk, Evelyn felt none of the old intimidation. She wore a red dress, not burgundy or wine or any of the muted variations she'd once convinced herself were more professional, but true red, the color of confidence and refusal to apologize for existing. "The divorce papers are straightforward," she said, sliding a manila folder across his desk. "I'm not asking for alimony and I'm not fighting you for the house. I just want my freedom." Marcus didn't touch the folder. He looked older than he had 3 months ago, grayer somehow, as if the realization that his wife was a separate person with her own needs had aged him in ways that legal stress never could. "Evelyn, please, can't we work through this? Marriage counseling, maybe? I can change." "You could change," she agreed gently, "but you shouldn't have to. And more importantly, I shouldn't have to wait for you to change in order to live authentically." Through the office windows, she could see people on the street below living their lives with the kind of purposeful energy that came from knowing who they were and where they were going. Once, the sight would have made her feel small and uncertain. Now it filled her with possibility. "I don't understand how 3 days in the Bahamas changed everything," Marcus said, his voice carrying the bewilderment of someone who had built his life on predictable outcomes. It didn't change everything, Evelyn replied. It just reminded me who I was before I forgot. The woman you fell in love with 16 years ago? She's still here. She just refuses to be invisible anymore. 1 year later, the marketing firm of Cooper and Associates occupied a converted warehouse in the Arts District, all exposed brick and industrial lighting, and the kind of creative energy that buzzed through the air like electricity. Evelyn's corner office overlooked a courtyard where local artists displayed their work, and today the space was filled with sculptures that seemed to dance in the afternoon light. The Hartwell campaign exceeded projections by 30%, her assistant, Jake, reported with the kind of enthusiasm that made Evelyn remember why she loved this work. They want to discuss expanding into digital platforms. Schedule a meeting for next week, Evelyn said, reviewing the quarterly reports spread across her desk. And see if Diana can join us by video call. Her insights on the educational market could be invaluable. Starting her own firm had been terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. There had been sleepless nights and financial uncertainty and moments when she'd questioned her sanity. But there had also been the pure joy of building something that reflected her values, of working with clients who appreciated intelligence and creativity rather than merely requiring compliance. Diana had become both friend and informal business advisor. Their bond forged in those transformative days in paradise, now deepened by regular video calls and an annual Women's Empowerment Weekend that had grown from just the two of them to a group of 12 women from around the country. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, now a junior in high school. "Got the lead in the spring musical! Drama club for the win!" Evelyn smiled, remembering Marcus's concerns about drama club not looking good on college applications. Sarah had ignored his advice and followed her passion, and now she was thriving in ways that no strategic optimization could have achieved. "Miss Cooper," Jake appeared in her doorway, "there's someone here to see you. Says she doesn't have an appointment, but she seemed, I don't know, like she really needs to talk to someone." In the reception area, Evelyn found a woman who looked hauntingly familiar, not in features, but in posture. The way she held her shoulders, the way she seemed to be trying to take up as little space as possible, the careful neutrality of her beige dress and minimal makeup. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, standing quickly when Evelyn approached. "I'm Rebecca Martinez. I heard about your company from my sister-in-law, Diana. She said you might understand." The words trailed off, but Evelyn understood perfectly. This was someone who had forgotten how to ask for what she wanted, who had spent so long accommodating everyone else's needs that she'd lost track of her own. "Would you like some coffee?" Evelyn asked gently. "Or tea? We can talk in my office." Rebecca's relief was palpable. "Coffee would be wonderful. Thank you." They settled in Evelyn's office, Rebecca clutching her coffee cup like a lifeline. Through the windows, the courtyard sculptures caught the light in ways that seemed to shift and change depending on your perspective.
"Diana told me about the Bahamas," Rebecca began hesitantly, "about how you remembered who you were. I think I need to do something like that, but I don't know how." "Tell me about your life," Evelyn said. "What does a typical day look like for you?" Rebecca's story was achingly familiar. A marriage where she had gradually diminished herself, a career she'd abandoned to support her husband's ambitions, dreams that had been deferred so long she could barely remember what they were. She was 45 and felt invisible, caught between the person she'd been and the person she couldn't imagine becoming. "I used to paint," Rebecca said suddenly, as if the admission surprised her. "Before marriage, before kids, before I decided that other people's needs were more important than my own. I was actually pretty good." "What stopped you?" "Life, responsibilities. My ex-husband said it was a hobby, not a real career, so when we needed to cut expenses..." She shrugged, the gesture carrying years of small surrenders. Evelyn pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. There's a community art center about 10 blocks from here. They offer classes for adults who want to rediscover their creativity. The woman who runs it is named Martha Chen, and she specializes in helping people reconnect with parts of themselves they thought they'd lost. Rebecca took the card with shaking hands. I don't know if I remember how. Muscle memory is stronger than you think. And besides, it's not about being good. It's about being yourself. They talked for another hour, Rebecca's posture gradually straightening as she remembered dreams she'd buried under decades of accommodation. By the time she left, there was something different in her walk, a purpose that hadn't been there when she'd arrived. 2 years later. The gallery opening was everything Evelyn had hoped it would be. Elegant without being pretentious, crowded with people who genuinely appreciated art, rather than just wanting to be seen at cultural events. Rebecca Martinez's paintings line the walls, bold, abstract pieces that seemed to pulse with the energy of someone who'd remembered how to take up space. I can't believe this is really happening, Rebecca said, radiant in a red dress that would have terrified her 2 years ago. 6 months ago, I was afraid to sign up for a painting class. Now I have my own show. You always had your own show. You just needed to remember how to claim it. Diana had flown in from Phoenix for the opening, and the 3 women stood together watching people discover Rebecca's work. There was something profoundly satisfying about witnessing someone's authentic self being celebrated, about seeing courage rewarded with recognition. Look at her, Diana murmured, watching Rebecca confidently discuss technique with a potential buyer. She's completely transformed. She's completely herself, Evelyn corrected. That's not the same thing as transformation. Sarah appeared at her mother's elbow, elegant in a black dress that she'd chosen herself, sophisticated but still age-appropriate, confident without being attention-seeking. At 17, she had the kind of self-possession that Evelyn was still learning to embody. The paintings are incredible, Sarah said. There's something so alive about them, like they were painted by someone who had been holding their breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. The observation was so perceptive, so perfectly articulated, that Evelyn felt her heart swell with pride. This was her daughter, intelligent, articulate, unafraid to exist fully in her own space. That's exactly what they are, she said, putting her arm around Sarah's shoulders. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply be yourself without apology. Across the gallery, Marcus appeared with his new girlfriend, a corporate attorney who wore her ambition like expensive jewelry. They made a handsome couple, both polished and professional and perfectly matched in their priorities. Marcus caught Evelyn's eye and nodded politely. Their relationship had evolved into something cordial but distant, built on shared concern for Sarah rather than any remaining romantic connection. "He looks happy," Sarah observed, following her mother's gaze. "He does," Evelyn agreed. "And I'm glad. We weren't wrong for each other. We were trying to be people we weren't. This is better for everyone." The evening continued with sales and conversations and the kind of energy that comes from witnessing someone's authentic self being celebrated by a community of people who understood the courage it took to create art that mattered. By the time the gallery began to empty, Rebecca had sold 6 paintings and received commissions for 3 more. "I need to thank you," she said to Evelyn as they prepared to leave, "not just for the introduction to Martha, but for showing me that it was possible to remember who I was." "You did the work," Evelyn replied. "I just reminded you that it was work worth doing." 5 years later, the beach house in Outer Banks was nothing like the luxury resorts where Evelyn had first remembered how to take up space. It was weathered and comfortable, the kind of place where sand tracked through the house was considered part of the charm, rather than a problem to be solved. The annual women's retreat had grown beyond anything Evelyn and Diana had originally imagined. 12 women from around the country gathered here every summer, united by their commitment to living authentically and supporting each other's courage to take up exactly the space they needed. This year's group included Rebecca, now a successful artist whose work hung in galleries across 3 states. There was Michelle, a former accountant who had left corporate America to open a bookstore that specialized in women's voices.
Dr. Janet Williams, who had returned to school at 50 to become a therapist after years of being told she was too sensitive for business. And there was Amanda, the newest member of their informal sisterhood, a woman in her early 30s who had driven 12 hours to get here after Diana mentioned the retreat during a conference call. "I don't know if I belong here," Amanda said on their first evening, sitting around the fire pit as waves crashed in the distance. "None of us were brave when we started," Diana said gently. "Courage isn't something you have, it's something you practice." "Tell us about your life," Evelyn suggested. "What does a typical day look like?" Amanda's story was both unique and universal. A successful career in tech that left her feeling empty. A relationship with a man who loved the idea of her but seemed uncomfortable with her reality. Dreams that felt too bold to voice out loud. "I want to write," she said finally, the words coming out like a confession. Not code, not reports, not emails. Stories. Novels. Things that matter to people in ways that have nothing to do with productivity or efficiency. Around the fire, 10 women who had once been afraid to take up space nodded with understanding. They had all been there, the moment when you realize that the life you're living doesn't match the dreams you're carrying. "What's stopping you?" Rebecca asked. "Everything. Fear, money, the fact that my boyfriend thinks writing is a waste of time for someone with my technical skills, the fact that I don't know if I'm any good." "You don't have to be good to start. You just have to start to get good." They spent the weekend sharing stories, offering encouragement, and modeling the radical act of women supporting each other's authentic selves without competition or judgment. By Sunday afternoon, Amanda had signed up for a writing workshop and started drafting her resignation letter from the tech company.
"I'm terrified," she admitted as they packed to leave. "Good," said Dr. Williams. "Terror means you're about to do something important." 10 years later. The wedding was everything Sarah had wanted. Intimate, joyful, and completely authentic to who she and her partner James were as a couple. The ceremony took place in the same courtyard where Evelyn's business had first flourished, surrounded by art and friends in the kind of community that forms around people who dared to live as their truest selves. Sarah was radiant in a dress she designed herself, flowing and unconventional and perfectly suited to a young woman who had never learned to apologize for taking up space. James gazed at her with the kind of adoration that comes from seeing someone completely and loving exactly what you find. "They look like themselves," Diana observed, watching the couple exchange vows they'd written themselves. "Not like they're performing some idea of what a wedding should be." Evelyn nodded, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter promise to love someone while remaining completely herself. This was what she'd wanted for Sarah, not the diminishment that had characterized her own first marriage, but the expansion that came from being seen and celebrated for exactly who you were. Marcus was there with his wife Jennifer, their own children now teenagers, who seemed to have inherited their mother's drive and their father's analytical mind. The blended family dynamic had taken years to navigate, but they'd found their way to something that worked for everyone involved. "She's magnificent," Marcus said to Evelyn during the reception, watching Sarah laugh with her new husband. "You did an incredible job raising her." "We did an incredible job," Evelyn corrected. "And more than that, we got out of her way and let her raise herself into who she was meant to be." The reception continued late into the evening, with dancing and toasts and the kind of celebration that happens when people feel genuinely happy to be exactly where they are. As the night wound down, Evelyn found herself on the fire escape that served as a makeshift balcony, looking out over the city lights. Contemplating the mysteries of the universe? Sarah appeared beside her, still in her wedding dress, but barefoot now, her hair slightly mussed from dancing. Contemplating how we get so lost in who we think we're supposed to be that we forget who we actually are, and how lucky we are when we find our way back.
She leaned against the railing beside her mother. "I don't remember you ever being lost. You've always seemed so yourself." Evelyn smiled, thinking of the woman who had once been too afraid to wear a green bikini, who had spent years making herself smaller to fit other people's comfort zones. "I spent a lot of years performing a version of myself that I thought other people needed. It took me until I was 40 to remember that my authentic self was worth more than anyone's approval." "What changed?" "I put on a bikini," Evelyn said simply, "and I remembered that my body, my joy, my presence in the world, all of it was mine to claim, not anyone else's to approve." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Is that why you always taught me to argue for what I wanted? To never make myself smaller?" "I taught you that because I didn't want you to spend years forgetting it the way I did. I wanted you to know, from the beginning, that you have the right to take up exactly the space you need." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city pulse with the lives of millions of people who were all finding their own ways to be authentically themselves. Some would get lost along the way, as Evelyn had. Others would remember who they were and refuse to let anyone convince them to be smaller. "Thank you," Sarah said eventually, "for showing me that it's possible to change your life at any age, to remember who you are even after you've forgotten, for teaching me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else is more important than fear." Evelyn pulled her daughter close, this magnificent young woman who had never learned to dim her light for other people's comfort.
"Thank you," she said, "for reminding me every day that authenticity is always worth fighting for." Present day. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, forwarded by Diana from someone who had seen Evelyn's story in a magazine article about women who had transformed their lives. The sender was a 38-year-old mother of 3 who felt invisible in her own life, who had read the article and felt something stir that she'd thought was dead. "Dear Miss Cooper," the email began, "I hope you don't mind me reaching out like this, but I read your story and I think I might be drowning in my own life. I don't remember the last time I did something because it made me happy. I don't remember the last time I felt beautiful or brave or like I mattered beyond my usefulness to other people. I have a bikini in my dresser drawer that I bought 2 years ago and never wore. It's red, like the color of the dress you were wearing in the photo with the article. Every time I look at it, I think about the woman who bought it, and I wonder where she went. I don't know if you still answer emails like this, but if you do, could you tell me how you found the courage to put on that green bikini? How you remembered that your happiness mattered? I'm drowning here, and I need to remember how to swim." Evelyn stared at the email for a long moment, remembering the woman who had stood in a hotel bathroom 8 years ago, holding an emerald bikini like a flag of surrender. That woman had felt invisible, unimportant, forgotten even by herself. That woman had needed someone to tell her that her joy mattered, that her dreams had value, that she deserved to take up exactly the space she needed. She hit reply and began to type. "Dear friend, the courage doesn't come first. The decision comes first, and the courage follows. You don't have to feel brave to put on that red bikini. You just have to decide that your happiness matters as much as everyone else's. Start small. Put on the bikini and look at yourself in the mirror. Don't apologize for what you see. Celebrate it. Your body has carried you through 38 years of life. It deserves to feel the sun. The woman who bought that bikini isn't gone. She's just waiting for you to remember her. And when you do, when you put on that red bikini and walk out into the world as your authentic self, you'll discover something revolutionary. The world doesn't need you to be smaller. It needs you to be exactly, unapologetically you. The water is warm. Come swim with us. With love and solidarity, Evelyn. She hit send and leaned back in her chair, looking out at the courtyard where new sculptures had appeared overnight, catching the morning light in ways that seemed to change depending on your perspective. In a few hours, she would go to lunch with Rebecca, whose latest show had sold out in 3 days. Tonight, she would have dinner with Dr. Williams, who was writing a book about the courage it takes to become yourself. Tomorrow, somewhere in the world, a woman would put on a red bikini for the first time in 2 years and remember that she deserved to take up space. And the ripples would continue spreading, one authentic moment at a time, reminding women everywhere that they had the right to be exactly who they were, without apology, without diminishment, without fear. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to make yourself smaller for other people's comfort. Sometimes the most powerful revolution begins with a single woman deciding she deserves to swim in the sun.